to meeting number 14 of the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. Before we begin, I'd ask all in-person participants, all of us are in person today, I believe, please read the guidelines written on these cards on the table. They are measures in place to help prevent audio incidents and to protect the health and safety of all participants, including our interpreters. You will notice there is a QR code on the card which links to a short awareness video should you need it. Please wait until I recognize you by name before you speak. All comments should be addressed through the chair. Before we begin, I do need a mover to adopt two operational budgets, one in the amount of $25,700 for our study on the effects of influencers and social media content. Can I have Mr. Shampoo? Thank you. And the second one is an additional amount of $2,000 to cover snacks and meals for our study on the effects of technological advances. Are you moving that?
I'll move.
You'll move for the snacks?
Move for
okay,
snacks,
perfect.
yeah, but let's
Is that all
make
we have
sure
to do?
there's
That's
good
good?
snacks.
And on to today's meeting, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Wednesday, October 29th, this committee is meeting for the consideration of the audit of the Indigenous Art Collection. We have with us today from the Department of Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs, Valerie Gideon, Deputy Minister, Rob Wright, Associate Deputy Minister, and Stephanie Barozzi, Chief Audit and Evaluation Executive. I will note for committee members that our original motion did ask for the director of the Indigenous Arts Centre. That position is vacant, so we were unable to fulfill that request. Am I giving Deputy Minister and Associate Deputy Minister 5 minutes each? Or yeah, you're going to present together, and then we'll hear from the auditor of the report, Ms. Barozzi. Hopefully I'm saying your name correctly. But we'll start with the Deputy Minister. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. To the chair and to members of the committee, we appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to speak about the Indigenous Art Centre and its stewardship of the Indigenous Art Collection by Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada. Tel que noté, je suis accompagnée aujourd'hui du sous-ministre.
As you've mentioned, with me today is my colleague, Associate Deputy Minister Rob Wright, as well as the Chief Audit and Evaluation Executive, Stephanie Barozzi. The Indigenous Art Collection is a national cultural treasure. It includes over 5,400 contemporary works created by First Nations, Inuit, and Métis artists from across the country. These works express identity, history, and resilience. They are also a significant economic driver for artists and their communities, as well as an essential component of reconciliation by honoring cultural rights, artistic expression, and Indigenous self-determination.
Our department has undertaken significant modernization of how the collection is cared for, documented, and shared with Canadians. We have relocated the collection to a secure, climate-controlled facility that meets professional standards. We have put in place strengthened environmental controls, digital tracking systems, condition reporting, and professional storage and handling procedures consistent with current National Museum standards. We also maintain a robust loan program that supports national and international exhibitions, ensuring Indigenous artists and their work reach audiences across the country and the world.
Some time ago, our department ordered an internal audit. This was done proactively so as to conduct a complete review of the management of the Indigenous Art Collection. This audit was not triggered by an incident, but as part of our regular audit plan, which is a risk-based audit plan. It reflects our commitment to transparency, responsibility, and continuous improvement. The audit confirmed numerous strengths, including the roles and responsibilities that were established within the Indigenous Art Centre to manage the collection, the security of storage, emergency plans and pest control plans, as well as improvements in inventory processes. The audit also revealed various issues requiring strengthening, such as complete resolution of record-keeping shortcomings, These shortcomings were inherited from decades past. Documentation of deaccession and disposal processes, as well as carrying out a long-term life cycle cost for preservation and promotion of the collection.
The recommendations of the audit, and work is well underway to implement all of them. This includes reviewing and updating policy instruments, establishing stronger contract and oversight frameworks, and reconciling historical records. Importantly, the audit also encouraged us to reflect on whether our department is the right long-term custodian of the collection, or whether a transfer to a long-standing national institution with Indigenous governance should be explored. We welcome that conversation. For more than 30 years, the Indigenous Art Collections mandate has included the possibility of Indigenous custodianship. We are just at the initial stages of looking at alternative models, and again, welcome feedback in that context. Whether that is Indigenous designed approaches that uphold artistic integrity, public accountability, and cultural sovereignty. But one important consideration will be the importance of maintaining the integrity of the collection. Tout au long de ce travail, nous restons déterminés à soutenir les artistes.
Throughout this work, we remain determined to support Indigenous artists. For decades, the Indigenous Arts Centre has directly contributed to artists' livelihoods through acquisitions, exhibit costs, and royalties for reproduction. We continue to ensure that artists receive equitable compensation and that the collection continues to support economic and cultural development for Indigenous peoples.
Collection is a responsibility we take seriously. We acknowledge the legacy challenges identified by the audit, and we are acting on them with urgency. We also recognize that reconciliation requires listening, adapting, and being open to change, including the possibility of Indigenous-led custodianship of the collection in the future. Well, Aliak, and I'd be pleased to, with Rob and Stephanie, answer your questions.
Thank you. And do we have an opening statement from Stephanie as well?
No, I didn't have one prepared.
Fair enough. No, that's great. I will turn then to Mrs. Thomas to begin a round of questions, and you have the floor for 6 minutes.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Well, sure. My first question here then is to Ms. Gideon. There are 5 recommendations that were given with regards to the action plan outlined in the audit. The planned implementation for those 5 recommendations was March 31st, 2025. You're saying things are well underway, but according to a March 31st, 2025 deadline, they shouldn't be well underway. They should be completed. Why aren't they?
So we do have a number of actions that actually have been completed.
I'm not asking about the ones that have been completed. I'm asking why there are some that have not been.
Right. So in terms of the first recommendation, we do have a draft of the policy document clarifying roles and responsibilities, and we expect that to be approved certainly prior to the March 31st, 2026 timeline that we've adjusted in the Management Response Action Plan. We have signed the contract with our third-party storage suppliers, so that action has been completed. And we are continuing to work with Public Services Procurement Canada on the next storage facility after 2027, when we will have to vacate the Tunney's Pasture Goldenrod facility. So that is something that we are working very closely on with PSPC. In terms of the biannual report to the corporate secretary, so that is going to be completed by next month or January 2026, and an annual report to the deputies is going to be institutionalized by March 2026. But I can assure you that I do meet regularly with the corporate secretary who reports directly to me, and that we also have had discussions and presentations about this audit and the Indigenous art collection on a regular basis at our senior management committee meeting. We have completed the baseline cost analysis, providing various scenarios for the third-party contractor for the storage facility, and we have completed the fact that that cost analysis would be updated every 5 years. So we are continuing to work on, we've instituted the security cameras, all of that has been completed, and we have drafted new standard operating procedures, and so
Ms.
final
Gideon,
approval of those will be by March 2026.
I'm going to move on. I think what's clear, though, is that there were recommendations that were signed off to be completed by March 31st, 2025, and in fact, they have not been. In fact, they will be completed, you're saying, not until spring of 2026 and maybe even beyond. I do think that there's some answers that are needed further there, but I don't know that we'll get those today. Ms. Brosey, are you able to identify the pieces that are missing? You said in your report that there's 132 that are unaccounted for. Do you know which pieces those are?
I do not know which pieces they are. In our audit, we were provided with a list of what was called unaccounted for, and they were for various reasons, and we were told that some of them were missing, but we did not do any further audit work on it because the value was not as high compared to the rest of the collection, so we focused our work on the pieces that were in inventory and in the vault.
Okay, so Ms. Gideon, are you aware of which pieces these 132 missing artworks
So we do
are?
have an inventory of those that are identified as the 132, and the work of the team continues with respect to being able to determine some of these are duplicate records, right? Some of these are based on when we transitioned in 2010 to a new information management system. Some of them have been located. So we have at least 12 pieces that have been located. 20 are reproductions of existing artworks, so we do have a list.
Okay, but you have 132 pieces that are missing, maybe 12 that you've recovered. So that brings us to 120 that are still unaccounted for. You have a list. You therefore know the artists of these pieces. Have they been notified?
So just to say, in terms of the unaccounted pieces, because we are following the Category A Federal Heritage Collection rules of procedures,
With
we
all due
are
respect,
not.
actually, you're not following that because, as it was mentioned in the audit, there aren't proper security cameras. There are 3 pieces that were damaged by water. There's no temperature control. None of this is according to protocol for a Type A, for a Category A.
So we did receive.
So I'll go back to my original question, Ms. Gideon. Have you identified which artists' pieces are missing? Have you told those artists? That's my question.
Under the Federal Heritage Collection Rules and Procedures for Category A, which we have received an inspection of the current facility that has validated the Category A status, the pieces have not been, technical terminology, en français, alienation, deaccessioned. And so we are not notifying because the pieces are not deaccessioned. So, and I wanted to also correct the fact that 20 are reproductions. They are not the original pieces of art as well, and that also needs to be factored into the total assessment.
So sorry, deaccessioned? Is that the word you're
That's
using?
correct.
And what does that
That's
mean?
correct. So that is where the piece would be identified and categorized as missing with certainty. These pieces have not yet met that threshold.
And how will you determine whether or not they are missing with certainty?
As we continue to work on the inventory and continue to get information with respect to the location, if we are not able to confirm the location, then at that point they would be under the deaccessioned categorization.
Some of these pieces have been missing since 1980. How many more years do you need? It's been 40.
So the unaccounted for would not be since 1980.
According to the minister's testimony, she said it was since 1980. So either she's misleading us or you are.
I was sitting next to the minister. The minister was indicating that these pieces, some of these pieces, were loaned during the 1980s to different regional and headquarter offices. She was not indicating that they had been unaccounted for since 1980. They were part of a loan program which was completely suspended in 2017, and that had an earlier moratorium because of the fact that a review had been conducted by the Canadian Conservation Institute that had indicated that an internal loan program provided too much risk to the collection. And as a result, that loan program no longer exists and has been discontinued.
Thank you. Mr. Alsu, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's great to see you as always, and thank you to our witnesses for taking the time to be with us today. Your time is appreciated. C'est très apprécié. The collection represents not only artistic excellence, but cultural knowledge, intergenerational memory, and the responsibilities that come with stewardship. Deputy, in an interview with CBC Radio-Canada, you said, La réconciliation avance de plus en plus rapidement.
Reconciliation is moving forward faster and faster because when you change the nature of the conversation to recognition and self-determination, you build confidence and trust.
Recognition of Indigenous self-determination should concretely appear in the oversight of the Indigenous art collection. And does the audit's findings indicate that these principles are currently being met?
It's an excellent question. You know, we often think about self-determination from the perspective of Section 35 rights holders, and here we're looking at individual artists. And so I think we do have to, the focus of the Indigenous art collection and the center has been making sure that the collection is maintained from its integrity perspective for the artists, that the economic benefits go to the artists. We don't retain copyright, right? And so we are very much focused on ensuring that the collection is accessible at no cost to the artist. So from a governance perspective, when you think about the collection, you know, it is going to be a way to balance the interests of Indigenous leadership and nations, but also the perspective of the individual artists. I hope that I'm like, we often, like, I'm always working in an environment where I'm discussing like policy initiatives and funding and services with Section 35 rights holders. But in this case, I have to remind myself that we are talking about individuals and how they identify themselves and the connection that they have to their art.
Fantastic. Thank you, Deputy. In another interview with CBC Radio-Canada, you stated, Moi, je suis la messagère. Je suis une porte-parole.
I am the messenger. I'm essentially a spokesperson in the system.
Those priorities are reflected in the policies and governance practices surrounding the Indigenous art collection. And what changes would strengthen the alignment between community expectation and departmental action?
Very interesting question. You're using my words to, I'm trying to remind myself of this interview here. So, I mean, I think that we are going at the pace of our core partners, right? And so we have been, over the last number of years, really setting up some strong, stable fora for working with Indigenous partners, both at the nation level, but also at the national table. The Indigenous art collection has not come up as a priority at this point in those contexts because Indigenous leaders have been very focused on addressing the longstanding equity gaps that they faced, and that has been a core priority. But as we continue to transform the relationship and invest in reconciliation, this is an area where I think there's huge potential to be able to provide greater Indigenous sovereignty in terms of the collection itself.
Fantastic. Thank you, Deputy. The audit raises the possibility that the Indigenous art collection may no longer be best housed within CERNAC. Has the department conducted an analysis of whether an Indigenous-led organization or museum institution is better equipped to steward the collection? And if not, why has this not been prioritized?
We have been having regular meetings with a number of different national institutions to explore just the feasibility and the viability levels of interest. But we have not yet launched a more formal process. And part of that, of course, is, as I noted earlier, the very strong priorities of First Nations and Inuit and Métis leadership and wanting to keep pace with those. But we have certainly been increasing the number of conversations and meetings that we have had in the last few months.
I'm not sure you've given this much thought as of yet, but what criteria would you use to determine whether retaining or transferring the stewardship would best support Indigenous cultural sovereignty?
The first criteria would be acceptance by Indigenous artists. The majority of Indigenous artists that are represented in the collection, I mean, that is a difficult threshold probably to reach, but I think it is a necessary one. And then, of course, the storage capacity, human capacity, the ability of resourcing and funding to make sure that the integrity of the collection can be maintained. Those would be other criteria that I would use to assess the future of the collection. But it wouldn't be just me alone, of course, making that decision.
Fantastic. Mr. Wright, and the Deputy has spoken to this already. I'm curious, the audit identifies 132 unaccounted for artworks, some possibly missing, yet also notes that there is no clear policy governing timely recovery efforts. What specific actions has the department taken to locate these works? And why was no recovery protocol established earlier, given the cultural value of these pieces?
Thank you very much for the question, Madam President. So I think one thing that's very important, and the Deputy mentioned this, we are going through a reconciliation process. So 12 of the 132 have been identified as duplicate records. and 20 have been identified as reproductions. And part of the reason of the timing of that, and the Deputy Minister mentioned that there was a legacy internal loan program which was terminated in 2017. And so items were returned between 2017 and 2023. The pandemic was in the middle of that return. So it's really in recent years where this reconciliation process has been able to be rectified. And so we are going through that process now. And I think it's also important to note that of the unaccounted for artworks, it represents an assessment value of about $49,000 of the overall collection value of $14.4 million. So about 0.34% of the overall value of the collection. So that helps to put it in context, I think. And as far as standard operating procedures and protocols, the team is working on that rapidly, and this process of moving to deaccessioning items is one of the elements that's being worked on now.
Thank you. Mr. Champoux, 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Merci.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. I confess that I'm rather shocked at what I'm hearing and what I read in this file, which has led us to study this. Do you think that this is a serious thing, that all of this has happened? What I find is that the collection has evolved. The origin of the collection was to purchase works of art to put them into federal offices. Ms. Gideon, do you think it's a serious thing that you have lost track of 120 artworks? Is this just perfectly day-to-day? Is this run-of-the-mill? Your colleague has said it's just a low percentage of the value of the collection, as though if you're a custodian of a collection, some works are worth less than others because their financial cost is lower. Well, first of all, I think it's a documentation issue, which dates to the fact that the collection started in 1965. Have you gone to the National Gallery in Ottawa? Yes. Do you know how many works of art they have at the National Gallery? No, I don't. Do you think that amongst the dozens of thousands of artworks that they have in their storage facilities and on their walls, that they would have lost track of any of them, regardless of their value? I can't ask you that question. I can't answer that question. I find it worrisome that you have custodianship of works of art and you manage to lose any, even if it's a small quantity. I understand that these works of art were loaned to government offices, but the fact that there was no mechanism to have a directory of these works. You mean, oh, you've got a wall to decorate, we'll find some works. Oh, we don't know what to do with this piece of Indigenous artwork. Oh, here it is. And then you end up with the Truth and Reconciliation process, and all of a sudden we start recognizing the value of First Nations heritage, and we're in a situation where we've lost 132 works of art from a collection that we had custodianship over. Oh, great, we found 12, fabulous, but there's still over 100 others. And you're saying, oh, it's not so bad, let's put things into their proper context, it's just a small proportion of a $14 million collection. I have so many questions about this. I find it highly concerning, much more than what I would have expected when I came here today. I'm told that the works of art, there are works of art for which we know their last known address, but we can't find them. I don't understand that sentence. I would like you to enlighten me. How can you know where the last address or location of something is, and we don't know where it is anymore, but it's not lost? Well, it's there, it's not there, we don't know where it is. Well, please enlighten me. Well, there was a transition to various information systems. We believe that in several cases, these files were simply redundant. That's important to consider. I'd also like to mention that when the federal government first began these initiatives, not much value was attributed to contemporary Indigenous artists. The country did not assign much value to them. So the federal government showed leadership in finding a way to be able to offer compensation to Indigenous artists in an environment in which they were not there wasn't a big demand. There wasn't a big trade in these works. It's very wonderful to see how things have changed, and the members of the committee here see perceive the true important value of this collection. We take it very seriously, let me assure you. All right. What's currently implemented to be able to find the missing works as quickly as possible? What have you implemented to ensure that this doesn't happen again? And what do you have to offer as compensation or comfort to the artists whose works were given to you at a time when maybe they weren't worth anything? They must have not been very happy that their works weren't worth much or anything, because if you're an artist, your works are worth something. You create something with your heart and your soul, and whether it's worth $500 in your mind or $50,000 in somebody else's mind, that's not what drives an artist. What have you established as a process to recover these works of art? Regardless of their value, they have to be recovered. And what links do you have with the artists who have been harmed by this process? Well, you've asked several questions. You've asked, what steps do we have in place? We are currently using a computer system to ensure that our inventory is properly managed, and it's used by other museums, including Foreign Affairs, as another federal department. We have received the Category A designation according to the protocols that we have to implement, and also policies and directives from the Treasury Board Secretariat. These are all things that we've implemented. We have a team in our organization, and the team is continuing to refine the information regarding the inventory to ensure that its integrity is respected. And what about the artists? Have you identified them? Do you have contact with them? We have lots of contact. The one whose works were lost. We have over 560 artists with whom we maintain communication. The ones whose works have been lost. Well, I'd have to check if the artists are still alive and if they're part of direct communications. We have 560 artists with whom we communicate regularly, as well as 489 institutions, as well as provinces and territories, as well as cultural centers, as well as museums. Well, I don't know, but if I'm a rights holder of an artist whose works you had a guardianship of, it doesn't seem that you've made any effort to find them or to compensate these people. I'm sure we're going to come back to this because my time is running out. But pardon the expression, I am flabbergasted by what I'm hearing. Thank you.
Mr. Schmel, welcome to Heritage Committee. You have the floor now for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, Minister. Thank you for joining us here today. Picking up on where we left off on Monday with the Minister, Minister Alty, when we were talking about this exact subject. Minister, Deputy Minister, the audits picked up on a number of gaps within the handling of these very valuable pieces, one of which was governance. And at the time, there was no clear senior level accountability to this collection. There was nobody that actually reported to the Deputy Minister. You have said that is now fixed, correct? You've actually got someone reporting to you about this collection.
So there was always, in the Indigenous Arts Centre for several years, the director of the Indigenous Arts Centre would report to the corporate secretary, who would report to the deputy minister. So that is still the structure that we have now. The issue is that the director of the Arts Centre position has been vacant for a few years. So the corporate secretary has ensured that an executive within the corporate secretary is now also helping to support that team. But when Rob and I started in the department, we did have someone who was acting as the director of the Arts Centre. We were hoping that that individual would become permanent in the role, but the individual decided to move on for another opportunities, and that happens in the public service.
We still have some pieces that went missing that we didn't find out about until an audit actually happened. And this has been happening for a while, as the minister pointed out on Monday in committee in INAN, that this has been happening for quite some time. We have a storage facility that was very insecure in terms of gaps within security protocols and otherwise. But has anybody been held accountable for the failures along the way?
So when you complete an internal audit, as part of the Management Response Action Plan, you actually identify who the senior leaders are that are accountable for each of the actions in the action plan. And ultimately, that action plan reports not just to the deputy, but we also have a departmental audit committee that will review the progress with respect to the action plan commitments that are made in the audit. And that's also why these audits are public.
So has somebody been held accountable?
For this particular audit
Correct.
that is in place?
No, for the result of the audit. Like you have
So we are
around 10
accountable.
employees.
Yes.
And over $1 million in budget to look over a collection that's missing over 100 pieces. Some of them recovered, yes, but there is some gaps here with a lot of zeros behind these numbers, millions of dollars. Has anybody been held accountable for these failures?
You specify what dollar value you're referring to that are millions of dollars?
You can talk about the 900 pieces. You can talk about the number is 50,000. The entire collection is worth 14 million. Regardless of what this number is, there are pieces missing, worth money, worth value to people who created that art. This doesn't happen in the National Gallery, as was pointed out by the block before me. Who has been held accountable? Has anybody?
So just to correct that the pieces have not been identified as missing.
Held accountable.
They have
Anybody
been
fired?
identified as unaccounted.
Has anybody been fired?
No one
Has anybody been
fired.
suspended?
No one has been suspended.
Has anybody been maybe told to come in the office 5 days a week as the ultimate penance?
I think that the purpose of an internal audit and the reason that we do risk-based audit is to proactively identify areas of risk so that management can put in place actions to remedy those risks.
Okay, so this would not happen in the National Gallery. So it's just to say some pieces have gone missing. It's okay. Why has nobody been held accountable?
Again, the origin of the collection began decades ago. The purpose of that collection was not to set up a national gallery. It was
You're
to
storing
set up
these pieces. You take responsibility for these pieces.
why we have changed the way the art has been managed. We have suspended the loan program internal that was the source of why
For decades, as
91
was
of these
pointed out.
pieces became
The minister
unaccounted.
talked about it in the 80s. You got the IAC in the 90s. Like, this has gone on for decades. We have missing pieces. Nobody's being held accountable, whether current, past. When are we going to see somebody, take accountability and say, yeah, this was my fault? This should have been better. I know you're putting in process. I get it. We have a storage container by a third party here. Was there even a contract with that provider?
Only 8% of the artworks are in that third-party storage. And we have repatriated a large, almost all of the artwork now in our
Okay.
vault, including repatriating all the pieces that were still held in
Would you
regional
have done that
offices.
if not for the audit?
We were already doing that before the audit.
You were already
Thank you.
We have
Thank you,
been doing
Mr.
that for
Schmill.
years.
Your time is up. Ms. Royer, you have 5 minutes.
Merci, Madam Chair. Thank you very much, and thank you to our witnesses here today. So from what I understand, a majority of the art pieces mentioned were loaned to government offices in the 80s, and the loan program has been canceled. Given that I would imagine at the time a lot of the documentation of the pieces was pen and paper. It wasn't digitized. It wasn't computerized. And I would imagine that some of that documentation is missing, hence the difficulty in finding the pieces. Recognizing that Canada's history from that time, we still had residential schools operating in the 80s. And that is a shameful part of our history. So it's hard to put myself into the sort of the position of those working at that time, but not computerized, and a different level of really understanding and respect. So this wasn't a lapse in security, really. It was really about old systems and that non-recognition of First Peoples, which is truly sad. So I also understand that measures have been put in place today to make sure that this never happens. Can you talk a little bit about how the department, and maybe this is a question for you, Valerie, but how the department today is ensuring that Indigenous protocols, spiritual care, and community input guide the preservation and exhibition of sacred or culturally sensitive works?
Thank you so much for the question. And I would say to you, I think that we can do more. There's a lot of engagement with Indigenous artists with respect to the collection and their own art within the collection. But I really think that in the area of governance, from the question that was raised earlier, there is more that we could do. For example, we are working on a public catalog of all of the artwork that people could browse through. We published a few years, well, just before the pandemic, the Indigenous Art Collection, a beautiful book that actually was able, you can go through and actually see all of the artwork. But I think that we could do more for the visibility of the collection. We've had a gallery space in our permanent facility at 10 Wellington, which of course we've now had to temporarily move out of because they are doing a refurbishment of the exterior of that building. And, but that gallery itself, even when we could reopen it, I think it's one area that we can do exhibition. And we have a really robust external loan program, which is also very helpful. We also engage Indigenous artists and Indigenous curators to do workshops and to do special events. And we've got several success stories that we can speak to. We've done partnerships also with other museums and galleries in that context. But I think, as I was mentioning earlier, I think ultimately an Indigenous-led approach to the governance of the collection would be more ideal than me speaking to you here as the representative person responsible for the management of the collection today.
I really appreciate that. And I think that is very important to the Canadian people, actually, in how we move forward in this. Thinking about the cataloging, you raised an important point that that's what you're doing now. And I'm sure that has been being done, but also in the record keeping of the works, regardless of who they were loaned to at different times, but how they were properly identified may also be called into question. And if you can't properly identify a piece, like if you don't have I guess, the technologies or the way in which we would assess works today, I imagine it would make it that would contribute to the difficulty in finding these works. But can you just assure us again that, well, actually, no, I'll shift a little bit because I'm running out of time with...
You have 20 seconds.
Maybe you could come back to it, but talking about the life cycle funding and how that's being managed and what's required to complete the baseline costs and things like that. Merci.
Monsieur Champoux pour 2 minutes et demie.
Merci.
Mr. Champoux, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you. I've asked you 2 questions earlier, and I did not receive a reply. Is compensation provided for artists whose works have been lost in this whole story? As I've already mentioned, we did not document loss of works of art, so we are not in a position to have these conversations with artists. Do you have discussions with Indigenous communities about this topic? Not with me directly. They did not ask us the question at all. Nobody got in touch with me to have more details. In the audit, there's a referral to various recommendations made, and I note that these recommendations have not been fully implemented, and among other recommendations, the roles and responsibilities for steps to take in the case of loss of Indigenous artwork are not clear. I don't have to refer you to the specific paragraph. I think you're familiar with it. An audit recommendation that's quite severe. Why weren't these recommendations implemented? But you've had this report since November of 2021. This is a situation that you've known about for longer than that as well. As I've already mentioned, we have a draft document. We're getting feedback from across our sectors, and essentially it comes up to me for approval and the approval of the committee. So it's not because steps are not being taken, it's simply the finalization of a document. How many other artworks, such as those who may be unaccounted for? I mean, you've continued to acquire Indigenous artworks, so have you continued to see any other unaccounted works? Have you had any other acquisitions? None last year, none since the audit. Now that you know that since you've known that works have disappeared. When they began the transition, it was just before the pandemic. I'm trying to remember this exact year. When the audit was done, or the evaluation was done, the evaluation of the space in which the collections were being housed in 2013 by the Canadian Institute of Conservation, which is associated with Heritage Canada, as you probably know. We asked them to review the space, and that's when they began to identify the fact that the internal loans program, well, there were too many risks associated with that practice, and so they recommended that it be discontinued. We had already placed a moratorium on that program in 2012, and so after the Conservation Institute's review, in 2017, we officially put an end to the loan program. Thank you.
Next, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So do you have any idea who has the art that is missing, that has been borrowed, of the 120 pieces? Do you have that?
Yes, so
Okay.
we have, so just to give you, like, obviously not list item by item, but in terms of, we know that we have 48 artworks that were part of regional and headquarter displays. We have 9 items that were part of regional displays, but 2 of them are reproductions. We have the specific years. So the first set of 48 artworks were between 94 and 2004, between 2005, 2006 for the night items. So I'm just giving you an example.
Okay.
But we do have documented
Yeah.
categories
they been
by year of where
contacted?
they were.
So have they been contacted? Let's say I had an art piece in my office, I leave, and all of a sudden that art piece is missing. Have you reached out in the last number of months to connect the piece, where it was, and who had it?
We already had proceeded with respect to repatriating all of the artwork from regional offices to bring them all into the vault. So they were, all the offices that had held artwork were contacted, and they were directed to actually bring or send back the artwork, which was a complex logistical process, in order to be able to repatriate them back all into the vault.
So those that didn't get returned, and you do know who had it last, have you contacted police about this? Have you started the search professionally, going to the police and saying, that piece is over there, we're not hearing from that group or that person, we need to get that piece back? I mean,
No indication at all of any type of theft or criminal activity associated with this process. This is a documentation process, and we are continuing to go through the inventory, but we have had absolutely no evidence that anyone appropriated this artwork in an inappropriate way.
So how many pieces have been brought back? You've just said, I think, 132 missing. You've recovered 12. Do you have an idea out of the 120, even though 20 are reproductions, do you have an idea on the other 100 then?
So we know that 91 were part of this internal loan program. Some were part of regional displays. Some were part of headquarter displays. Some were part of regional and headquarter office loans. So we do have a drill down list of those categories.
So if you reached out to any of these groups to find that 100 that were left unaccounted for now, what are you going to do to recover the 100 pieces?
So we are looking at the records that we have in order to be able to, first order is to confirm which ones are duplicate records.
Know that.
That is part of the transition that we did in 2010 to the new information system.
You should know what's missing. It wouldn't take that much.
Again, they are not categorized as missing. They are categorized as unaccounted. It is different with respect to the
Wordsmith.
designations.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. The Vatican's going to send over 62 pieces. It's been in the news lately from Indigenous. Would you be in charge of that when it does arrive?
No, we don't have a role in the repatriation of the pieces from the Vatican.
Okay.
That was something that was negotiated with other partners. We have not been implicated, but I did see the National Chief's engagement at the Vatican and so forth, but we were not called upon.
Thank you. That's good. I don't know about the value because when I look at Indigenous art today, it has tripled in value the last 5 years. So when you give me the number of 49,000, I really question that. You look at Indigenous art in this country, like I said, it's tripled. I look at Alan Sapp pieces that probably came here for $3,000 are now $15,000 hanging in certain offices. So I don't know where you're getting this number of 49,000, but I can tell you it's low. You've got 14.4 million that you suspect is the total amount that you have, but I'm going to really question the 49,000 that is connected with the missing 100 pieces that we don't know where they are today. Would you agree with me on Indigenous art? It is the hottest.
Thank you, Mr. Roy.
It is the hottest.
Monsieur Jumba, prochainement pour 5 minutes.
You have 5 minutes, Mr. Jumba. Thank you, Chair. And hello, everyone. Ms. Gideon, if I've understood correctly, these works would have been recognized as being missing a number of years ago. Well, the risk assessment for the collection was carried out in 2013. In 2012, we had already imposed a moratorium to stop the loans program, the office lending program. I wasn't there at the time, but I imagine that this was because people wanted to be sure that the collection be better protected. So I understand you've inherited a situation. You're trying now to figure out how everything can be reorganized. So here's my question. What steps have been implemented? My colleague's, Mr. Champous's question was not fully asked. What mechanisms have been implemented today by you, under your guard, so that future works will no longer become lost or won't be unaccounted for or missing? Well, for the physical protection, the place in which the art is current, it's been certified as Category A and satisfies the RCMP's procedures for security for the storage of artwork. This includes access restrictions regarding access to the warehouse, humidity and temperature control, 24-hour-a-day surveillance, motion detectors, pest control, emergency management. These are all criteria that are assessed to ensure that we have certification. But we also use a computer management system for inventory management. As I've already mentioned, this is used by other museums, including Foreign Affairs, because, as we've seen, documentation is extremely important. We have to be sure to continue to provide quality assurance for the documentation that we receive, including digital documentation. There are also recommendations that were supposed to be applied by March 31st, 2025. Now you've spoken to my colleague, Thomas. Some part should have been done in parallel. What can we, in terms of the government machinery or House of Commons, what do we need to do to be able to assist you in fulfilling the various recommendations? That's an excellent question. Thank you very much for it. It's important to continue to talk about the importance of infrastructure and operational financing so that we can continue our efforts, not only to protect the collection, but also to promote the collection, as well as helping to negotiate with artists and partners to see what the best future is for the prosperity of the collection. And what about Truth and Reconciliation? What does this Day of Truth and Reconciliation have in common with these so-called missing works? Is there any connection between your department and this Truth and Reconciliation Day? How do you see this after 2013? Well, our department's responsibility is to coordinate federal response to calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. For example, we are also responsible for advancing the bill to establish the National Truth and Reconciliation Council, which is independent of the federal government, but which will annually report on the country's efforts to continue to promote the calls to action. That's in our department. There are calls to action which are specific and refer specifically to Indigenous art. We talk a lot about languages, Indigenous languages, and maintenance of languages, but art is also very important for Indigenous art. Thank you.
You're next for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's still so confusing to the public. If they were listening to this meeting today, trying to figure out how $14 million worth of art, a bunch of it goes missing. It's almost inconceivable that would happen at the National Gallery. Obviously, this is Indigenous art. It's very valuable. Walk me through again what happened here. Where did it go missing from? Giving addresses. We just want some basic answers, and we need it in plain talk as well, plain English.
Sure. So for decades, the collection was established in order to purchase Indigenous contemporary art in order to place it in federal offices across the country. In that context, it was not established as a gallery or as a museum. And so, after several decades of this evolution, there was, of course, a modernization of the approach to identify that the artwork was of value and needed to be repatriated and safely secured and meet designations that would be relating to a federal heritage collection. So that was an evolution.
Let me just interrupt. Sorry, I'm sorry, but I think the public wants to know how could this art just go missing, and why have you not been able to identify where most of it, where the missing stuff is?
I think the public would say that over all of these decades and an incredibly significant national contemporary Indigenous art collection has been preserved, with over 5,000 Indigenous art pieces valued at $14.4 million, and that the government is committed to continuing to work with Indigenous artists to preserve the integrity of the collection, and has also provided economic benefits to Indigenous artists.
You're not answering the question. Can you just tell how could this valuable artwork go missing, and explain again what you're doing to recover these pieces?
So they are not missing. They are unaccounted for. And we are continuing to look at the documentation that has evolved from paper-based files to information systems, digital records, over decades, long-standing decades of the building of this collection over time. Again, a very small proportion, less than 1% of the collection.
Madam, how can something be missing that you can't find and not be missing? That's complete doublespeak.
These are the categories that are set of unaccounted pieces, which means that we are looking at the documentation of their precise location. There is no certainty that we will not be able to identify those pieces or that they are not duplicate records. Until that threshold is passed, the designation is unaccounted.
And it sounds like doublespeak to me. How come nobody's been disciplined for this terrible, these pieces that are missing that aren't really missing in your view? How come they haven't been disciplined? Did anybody even get a memo? Like an angry memo from the boss?
The reason that internal audits are conducted is for departments to proactively identify areas of risk so that we can proactively mitigate them and address them. An audit is not intended to be a punitive exercise in the system. It is intended to support quality improvement.
When you look at the audit and you find out that somebody screwed up, then is it not your duty or somebody's duty to say, come in here and explain yourself? And if you can't explain yourself, maybe you're looking for a new job.
Again, these artworks were loaned, the majority, in the 1980s in regional and headquarter offices. That was the intention of the collection. The department has now since modernized the approach to repatriate artworks and to store them in an RCMP standard and category A vault.
Speaking of the RCMP, why haven't police been notified about the artwork that you can't find? You can't find it. Isn't that the job of police to investigate things like this? If I steal this chair and walk out with it, do you think the RCMP or somebody might be interested in talking to me?
A piece of artwork that was legitimately loaned to an office in the 1980s and repatriated in 2017.
Legitimately returned, was it?
It was not a criminal
that's your
intent.
time. Mr. Miles, you now have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thanks for being here today. I think these are, I think they're important questions. I just want to go a little bit to what Martin was asking about, just about the relationship between the works and the artists themselves. Obviously, with the role of the office now, it is about maintaining a relationship with artists. And as Monsieur Champoux said, like the value is only so relative. It's very much about the work that matters to them. So how do you rebuild trust? Has there been kind of a difference in the relationship, given this? And is there an exercise in rebuilding trust between those artists and your office and what you in the collection?
So thank you for that. So I myself have not been contacted by any artists that have raised questions with respect to the relationship with the art collection and the art center. We maintain relationships with 560 artists across the country. We have received a lot of positive feedback about the art collection and the art center's work in terms of, again, not retaining copyright, providing significant economic benefits to artists, like $5.6 million has been provided to Indigenous artists as a result of the way in which the art collection is maintained. The external loan program is very robust and engages the artists specifically in terms of where artwork is loaned and ensuring that they receive revenue from that loan program. I do think that artists want to ensure that there will be continued resources to help support the maintenance of the integrity of the collection and ensuring that we have the Category A designation with respect to facilities that stores their artwork. I don't know, Rob, if you have more you'd like to add.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think as the deputy indicated, so on average about a little over $250,000 goes directly to Indigenous artists through this program. Combination of acquisitions and all the loans and exhibits, and the CARFAC kind of program is used to be able to allocate the appropriate amount of funds, royalties, if you will, to the artists. And under the modern, the external loan program, which is very different from this legacy internal loan program that operated from the 1960s to 2017, there is a chain of custody. There is protocol, standard operating procedures in place. The borrowers provide the funds directly to the artists. They have to have insurance for all of the items. There has to be a certain standard of handling of all of the artworks. So the legacy loan program and the current loan program that we operate are quite night and day. The audit period for this was from 2019 to 2024. Within the audit period, there were no items that were designated as unaccounted for. These are legacy issues that we're trying to reconcile now and trying to take that very seriously to reconcile what are important issues. But it is important to understand in a 5-year audit period, there were no artworks that were itemized as having gone missing during that period or unaccounted for during that period. So there is still room for improvement. We are leaning forward and trying to make those improvements. And a number of improvements have been made over the past number of months. And we took the results of the audit quite seriously and have tried to respond to those in a way that it meets the objective of whether we're talking about making sure that the storage is top quality, meeting Category A and RCMP standards, whether the policies and standard operating procedures for the loan program are tightened up. So we are really trying to kind of make sure that we're running this in a professional manner.
The relationship is strong. That was more what I wanted to ask, is how to maintain that strong relationship between artists and the collection, because that's obviously a really, really important thing for it to move forward. It seems to me that part of...
Sorry, Mr.
No problem.
You're out
No
of
problem.
time.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Monsieur Champoux, 2 minutes et demie.
Merci.
You have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to refer back to what my colleague, Mr. Diot, referred to earlier. Talking about these works of art which have been lost. And you've repeated several times, Madam, that they're not lost, they're simply unaccounted for. But you don't know where they are. We don't know where they are, but they're not lost. Well, do you know where they are? Are they identified? I would like to stop playing with words and say that you don't have no idea where they are. If they're to say we don't know where they are, they're lost. But to say, oh, they're not, we don't have a directory of them. Well, no. Listen, is this about spinning? Or can we just agree that these works of art have not been in a directory because they have been lost? What do you think?
Je ne peux pas être en accord.
I cannot agree with you on this point. Very well. If you don't agree with me on this point, do you know where these artworks are? What I can tell you is our team of employees, do you know where the works are? They're working on completing the documentation. Do you know where the works are? Yes or no? Simple question. Our team, Ms. Gideon, I only have 2.5 minutes, and you're not answering a simple question by yes or no. Do you know where the works are, the ones which are lost, 120? If I were to answer the question in the way in which you asked it, that would not be information which was practical and in line with the evaluation of the situation by our own team, who are experts in the matter. Briefings. Sometimes being a committee representative is just terrible. Earlier, you said that in 2012, 2013, you were made aware of the problem. So it's a problem that has been known since then. In 2017, you stopped the practice. In 2019, the audit began. The 2024 audit covers 2019 to 2024. That's what we were just told, right? But despite that, there are recommendations in this audit that have not been fully fulfilled. You've been aware of this problem since 2012, 2013. 2017, you had changed your processes, and there are still shortcomings. If we were in a private corporation, I think that company would have gone bankrupt. Do you recognize that for 13 years you've been aware of a problem and you have not yet implemented procedures that are ironclad so that this significant issue, we're in a committee meeting here to discuss it, so that this problem could be resolved and everybody could be reassured? The audit was not simply examining that issue. The audit recommendations go beyond this. They're talking about the importance, role, and responsibilities of various employees, various sectors of the department who play a role in the collection, ensuring that people who manage the collection have annual reports that are provided to senior management. So the senior management not only examines this issue, but also examines all the initiatives that the Indigenous Art Collection and Centre do. They have lots of different activities to have a comprehension of the economic benefits to artists. So the audit is much broader. The audit was not specifically on this point. Thank you.
So, Ms. Gideon, what we have heard from you is that according to the audit, there are 132 pieces that, I'll quote, works not accounted for. According to you, they're not missing, they're not lost, but according to the audit, they're unaccounted for. Word salad, right? A refusal to refer to really what's going on here because you don't want to use certain words. But at the end of the day, there are 132 pieces that are unaccounted for according to the audit. Has any initiative been taken to recover those 132 pieces?
I think I've mentioned several times that our team is looking at the reconciliation of those particular records and documents, which is what led them to be able to confirm the location of 12 pieces and that 20 of those pieces are also reproductions. I mean, those are active efforts.
So,
the reason that we're not changing the
Gideon,
designation is because the exercise is not
Ms. Gideon,
completed.
sorry, this is my time, and I'll just interrupt you there. Thank you. According to the audit, the last location of many of these pieces is known. So what work has been done by you and your team to make sure that those pieces then can be recovered?
So the team is dedicated exactly to looking at identifying the location of those pieces by reviewing whether or not these records are duplicated from previous records held along with those that were transitioned into the information system in 2010. They're looking at photographs, they're looking at all of the records and documentation to be able to trace back where those
according to the audit and according to your own admission here today, it's known where these pieces last were. It seems rather simple then to be able to just simply go back to that source, knock on the door, pick up the phone, send an email, take some sort of initiative to make sure that those pieces are recovered. Has any of that been done?
So yes, as I mentioned before, when there was an identification that the loan program needed to be suspended, there was an effort to repatriate all of the artwork. The artwork was initially stored in our original building location of 10 Wellington, and we've had a transition into the Goldenrod Vault facility. So that is also part of the reconciliation efforts, is just to ensure that we have a very robust inventory management system.
So again, Ms. Gideon, how many of those pieces then have been repatriated? Only 12?
The 132 that have been identified in terms of their location, it is 12, but there were many more artworks that were repatriated that were part of the former internal loan program. I don't have the exact number of the full set of artwork that actually came back into the National Capital Region and is stored in our vault.
Let's not muddy the facts here. Out of 132, even though you know the last location where many of those art pieces were, only 12 have been recovered.
12, the location has been confirmed. It doesn't mean that it's not a recovery issue.
So it gets worse. It's not even that they've been brought back in. It's actually just simply that they've been located.
They're in the vault, but the issue is where we've been able to confirm that those pieces are no longer unaccounted for.
Okay, so 132 pieces gone, unaccounted for. Of those, 12 have been found and brought back in. That still leaves another 120 that are unaccounted for.
20?
There's no question there. It's just a statement. Those are the facts that have been laid out here today. That's incredibly shameful. And then what I hear you saying, Ms. Gideon and Mr. Wright, is don't worry, Canadians. It's only worth $49,000. Never mind the cultural value. Never mind our pursuit of reconciliation as a nation. Never mind any of that. It's just $49,000 worth of art. You shrug your shoulders and you pretend that it doesn't matter in comparison to the other $14 million worth of pieces that you have in your care. Is that what you're expecting of Canadians? They should just turn a blind eye to this.
What we are expecting is for Canadians to understand that the history of the collection and how the collection was built and what its original intent was. And for Canadians to know that we have modernized and are investing in preserving the integrity of this collection in 2025 according to the standards of 2025 to
Ms. Gideon, I'll
avoid
just interrupt you
any
right there.
instances like this in the future.
There was a report done in 2013, another in 2017, another in 2019, and now in 2024. There's been ample time to correct this, Ms. Gideon. And no correction has been made. And today you've admitted that there are pieces that have been unaccounted for since the 1980s. And here we are in 2025, 40 plus years later. And those pieces are still not recovered, even though in many cases, according to the audit, the last location is known. That's despicable.
Mr. Miles, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a question more about just the history. Part of what is clearly becoming a challenge here is the fact that this was the original intent in the 60s and 70s was that it was not a collection. I know we've talked about this a bit, but part of this is the fact that these were purchased and then sent out. So can we talk, I think we need some clarity on what that regional loan program looked like. There was no intention to keep an eye on where these things went. They were purchased and then just sent around the country. And then at some point there was a decision to say, okay, we want to have a collection. So it was actually in turning into a collection that there was responsibility taken for these pieces, because up to that point there was no responsibility for these. They were purchased and loaned. Is that the idea?
I'd say that's an accurate description of the fact that, the intention was to create opportunities for contemporary Indigenous art and bring value and revenue to artists by, instead of purchasing other art in federal offices, by actually purchasing art directly from Indigenous artists and displaying them in regional offices. But as the value of that collection grew, and also as just general standards changed in office buildings, where now there are much more rigorous and robust standards with respect to how art is displayed, acquired, displayed, maintained, insured, in office settings, the department repatriated and brought back all of these artworks. And it did take years for that exercise, just going back to the previous question, because of the logistical complexity of also being able to safely transport artwork from across the country back into the National Capital Region. That was also a very resource-intensive exercise to then be able to establish it as a collection.
Yeah, so I'm just curious as to what prompted. I mean, I know you were saying that because the value had gone up. What was it? Is that what actually prompted it to turn it into an official collection? I'm trying to figure out when that and at what era did that? What exact year did that happen?
In 1994, they started to actually build an inventory. It took 10 years to build that inventory. And again, I think, having been many years in the federal public service in these Indigenous portfolio departments, we have offices all over the country. I used to manage, hospitals. We would have hospitals. We had nursing stations. We had health centers. We had different offices. It's not the same location variability as you would necessarily consider if you're visiting an office here in Ottawa. So there was a lot of we had northern offices, we still do, but we had satellite offices. So it is a very resource-intensive exercise to be able to identify, document, locate, transport, the size of the artwork, everything else, and then also ensure that the storage capacity was safe enough. So it took 10 years to inventory it, and that's at that point that they started to actually look at planning for it as a collection.
And they weren't purchased with archival purposes.
That's right.
Right. Okay. MP El Sud, did you have a question that you wanted to add to the mix? I think I have.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, and thank you, MP Miles. I'm curious, and I ask strictly because obviously the work that of this Indigenous art collection is very much founded on everything that is a relationship, right? And with every relationship, it's a matter of confidence, it's a matter of trust. And I latch on to something that was mentioned earlier, Deputy, something to the tune of, I haven't been contacted by any Indigenous artists with negative feedback. Is that accurate? Do I recall that accurately?
Well, not for myself.
Yes.
So with respect to the audit itself, I've not been myself that I'm aware of contacted with respect to the audit itself.
I'm curious, are you aware of any negative feedback from Indigenous artists on this since the audit?
Good question. I mean, I myself cannot say that I have been, but I don't know, Stephanie, if you've heard anything since as the audit executive?
No, I have not heard any comments other than what we're talking about here today, but not from anybody else.
Rob?
No, moi non plus. I've not heard any critiques on the basis of the program.
Interesting. I only have 10 seconds left. I will cede my time.
Members up for a fourth round of questions? Starting with the Conservatives. I don't have a name. Mr. Schmale, over to you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Deputy Minister, we talked about the unaccounted for pieces. How many artists have been notified that their pieces may be unaccounted for?
I'm not aware of any notifications that have gone out.
Okay. Are you planning, or you or your department planning to notify these individuals?
If we receive certainty that we are unable to account for the piece, then we would have a responsibility to notify the Indigenous artist.
What is your target for recovering or identifying the unaccounted pieces, the 100 or so that are still unaccounted for?
I don't have a specific target at this point.
Are you setting a deadline on when that might happen? If you aren't able to find them in a certain amount of time, say 6 months or a year, then notifying those artists that their pieces may be missing at that point?
I think it's a fair point, and I do think that it's something that I will take back to the team to see what their best advice is around setting up that time frame.
Okay, so are you going to table that to the committee? What you come up with here on your timeline? Are you?
We will have to consult our parliamentary relations folks to see what their advice is on that point.
You could let us know right now if you wanted.
No, I will consult.
You're going to consult. We're going to continue consulting. Okay, so given the fact that we've had, according to page 19 on the audit report, a number of previous audits here. Okay, now going back to my other question that I started with when I asked if anyone was suspended, anyone was fired, or anything else that had happened. It looks like the department had some idea that there could be risks associated with the collection, there could be issues of damage or potential fixes if not made. You would have, pieces that would deteriorate. This goes back to like 2013, if not before. And nobody picked up on it along the way. It just kept all the way through. And yet we get to here, we have 10 people in tasked with looking over this collection at a budget of 1.2 million. And we've had decades where these problems have gone unanswered. And at what point does someone get held accountable?
So actions were taken after that 2013 review that you're speaking about around the Canadian Conservation Institute to significantly improve the storage facilities. And as I mentioned before, this is where the official suspension of the loan program, it was informed by that review. So there were several actions that continued to be taken in order to be able to not just not follow through on those review recommendations. The recommendations have been and continue to be followed through. There have been investments in terms of the storage facility to ensure that, as I noted, it is evaluated as meeting the Category A designation as well as the RCMP secured storage protocols. So there were actions taken.
There were actions, but we have these missing pieces that went around for decades as well. So I'm still a little, I guess, still a little just thrown off here that we haven't got to the point of letting the artists know that their pieces might be missing. Because I think there could be some value to the artists, the creators themselves, and the fact that they believe that their pieces are being held properly by the government, and then they're just unaccounted for. They're gone. I think we owe it to these artists to tell them, probably sooner rather than later.
Is there a question?
Well, would you agree with that?
Well,
I know you said 6.
I think the artists' interests are.
I would think that would be something that would be up front. That would be something. Well, maybe we should let these people know now rather than coming up with another strategy for it.
The team has been working very diligently to ensure that when they communicate with the artists, that they have reached a conclusion of certainty that they are not able to account for that artwork. So they take that responsibility very seriously.
So in the records where, as Ms. Thomas was talking about, you have kind of the last known individual or group to sign out a piece, how many more do you still have to go through, left to go through? You have 100 still. I'm going to focus in on the 100. How many more have you gone? Like, is there 50 left and you can't find the other 50? What number are we looking at?
So I'm trying to understand sort of the question. So I think like we have already identified what pocket of time and the number of artworks and where they were situated. So right now the team has been very focused on assessing what could be duplicate records, and that has been a big part of the focus that they have now.
Thank you. Monsieur Toumba, pour 5 minutes, vous avez la parole.
Mr. Toumba, you have 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Now, earlier, I asked you a question. Now, I had understood that there was an initial realization that works were lost around 2013. From 2013 to today, several events have taken place. I would like to know, what help, support have you had from various governments to date to be able to retrace these missing or unaccounted for works? It's not really an issue that was raised by political leaders or other departments. Personally, I think that our team is well equipped to continue the work of ensuring that they have, in fact, examined all of the documentation that could be available, the archives, etc., to ensure that they can give us a definitive conclusion as to the works that we're talking about today. Have you made plans to publish the list of lost objects so that the creators of these works, those who are still alive or their descendants, become aware that these works have disappeared, been lost, or are unaccounted for and are being looked for? I think your question is, have we made any plans for what we would do if, well, I could ask the team. I don't have this information directly in front of me about what specific steps they would take for that type of communication. But that's a question I could come back to you with. As I've already said, they're in regular touch with 560 artists. So it's nothing new to communicate with artists for them. They always do it, especially when we're involved in loan programs or various teams in various ways. So I am confident that they have the required expertise to be able to have these conversations with the artists. Similarly, you talk about interinstitution loans, be it museums or cultural institutions. Are there any partnerships between cultural museums to improve visibility and protection of current works? That's an excellent question. We work frequently with cultural centers because they don't have much funding to be able to acquire art. So we ensure that they can access works of art without having high costs. So that's an example of what we do with cultural centers. We also have established partnerships with Heritage Canada for special events using reproductions of works of art in various public spaces in the National Capital Region, such as Art in the Courtyard, Art in the Tunnels. They have made special demonstrations. We've also participated together with Carleton University on the Morisot project to demonstrate Morisot works between 1955 and 1985. And also, there are artworks illustrated in Canadian Geographic, as well as the History of Canada magazine, the Canadian Art Institute magazines. These are things that we do to try to demonstrate the value of our collection. So an audit took place, recommendations were made. Today, according to you and your team, what key recommendations came from this audit, and what have we seen for implementation thereof? Thank you for the question. I would say it's very important for us to have an internal policy, as I've already mentioned. We have an updated draft to be able to describe the roles and responsibilities within the department. If we are to continue to have a private company offering storage for a small proportion of the works of art. Currently, there are 8% in such storage. It's very important to have contracts in place that clearly state the conditions that have to be fulfilled according to their responsibilities. As I've already mentioned, it's important to have a space available to us after 2026, after 2027, because the current space will no longer be available. And the cost analysis which we completed, I think it's important for us to have it and update it regularly to ensure that we always proactively set aside the necessary resources in the department budgets to ensure that all collection protections are there. Thank you. Mr. Champoux, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Several points keep coming to mind in today's meeting. One in particular, works that are unaccounted for, but we know their last location. So those locations of these works of art which were hung there or brought there, what kind of places are these? Companies, government offices? Federal offices, only federal offices? And there were no contracts? There was no documentation? Okay, I'm sending you this artist's work. Here's a piece of paper you sign. There was documentation because that's how we know in general. But, you know, there was a regional office and an address. I can't tell you specifically whether in all cases, well, okay, you know it's a government office. Well, so these unaccounted for works, I don't dare say they're lost because, of course, that we've canceled that term of lost. Is this negligence? Is it incompetence? I'm trying to be polite and not nasty, but I just cannot understand how you can have 100 works of art that just disappear. Is this negligence? I'd like to quote my colleague, Jamie Schmiel, Conservative, who talked to the Canadian Press representative in an article that was on the Radio-Canada website. If a group of 7 work of art was hung in a government office, some people would know where it was and would expect it to be able to be returned. So why are these Indigenous works of art why were these works of art neglected, whereas so much attention would have been paid to a known artist's work? I find this difficult to understand and to explain. I'd like to know what explanation you can offer, because I just cannot grasp it. I think it's important to recognize again the purpose of the exercise initially was to acquire art for federal offices. So it was decoration? Well, it was a program to decorate federal offices, yes, but which gave priority to revenue for Indigenous artists. This was the 1960s. And Riopelle was also around in the 60s. We're talking about 60s, 70s, 80s. The intention of the exercise was not to establish a national art collection. That evolved, but they're still artists. I can't believe that there wasn't an intention. You're still talking about artists. Well, I hope I can go back home because I just cannot find my car keys. I can't, they're unaccounted for. I hope I'll be able to find my way home.
I share my colleague's concern. I mean, at the end of the day, you still have these works of art, and they've just gone missing. And there was no contract, apparently you're saying, that was created with regard to where those pieces went and under whose care they were put. And now, you just kind of shrug your shoulders and go, well, it's only $49,000 worth. Don't worry, folks. Look, I wonder if you would be willing to table with the committee the works that are unaccounted for.
I don't know if Rob, what your thoughts are. I mean, from my perspective, I think we are not able to, under the Access to Information Act, disclose the specifics with respect to the artwork and the artists. So I think that we would be able to share a list that would be quite generic, but we are not in a place where we would be able to share specifics with the committee.
Okay. Ms. Gideon, would you agree to go seek a legal opinion on that and return that legal opinion to this committee along with whatever you might be able to table in terms of that list of unaccounted works?
A legal opinion.
Yeah.
I have not sought legal advice with respect to this particular issue.
You're offering a legal opinion right now in terms of access to information. It's your opinion, and so I'm wondering if you're not able to provide this committee with a list of the unaccounted works, then the committee would request that you also supply us with a legal opinion.
I'm not offering a legal opinion. I am offering
Ms. Gideon.
an assessment by the Access to Information Act experts and team that we have about what our department can provide under the Act.
Will you agree to table with this committee a list of unaccounted works?
We've provided and are providing a response to an Access to Information Act request on this particular issue.
Ms. Gideon, you're not answering my question. Will you table with this committee a list of the unaccounted works?
I'm unable to table with this committee a list of unaccounted work that provides specifics with respect to the artists, anything that could disclose the proprietary information of those artists.
And why are you saying to me that you are unable to provide that?
Because we've received advice from our Access to Information team about what can be provided publicly with respect to this information as a result of receiving a request.
So as a committee of Parliament, we do have the right to ask for such information, and there are certain laws that do not hinder us. So if you do not provide that list to us, then we would ask for a legal opinion. Is that understood?
I understand what you're saying to me.
Excellent. And is that agreed to?
I'm not able to agree to that at this time. I do need to better understand what you're referring to in terms of the legal opinion and the legal basis. I am sharing with you that under the Access to Information Act, we are unable to provide that information.
The list that is being asked for today, then that would mean that there are legal grounds to deny us that. And so we would ask for that to be sent.
I appreciate that you've made a request to me. I do need time to be able to consider it and my response.
Okay, I'll allow the clerk to follow up on that. I don't think you understand how these requests work. The other thing that I would ask for you to table with this committee is the contract, a copy of the contract. If there was a past contract used for the loan program, we would ask for that. And my understanding, Mr. Wright, based on your testimony today, is that there is now a current loan program contract. And so we would ask for a copy of that contract as well. Again, if you refuse to provide this to the committee, then we would ask for your lawyer to send us a legal opinion with regards to why that information cannot be disclosed. The third thing that I would ask for you to table with this committee is which artists have works that have gone missing. And again, Ms. Gideon and Mr. Wright, if you are not able to table this information with this committee, as we are requesting you to do under parliamentary procedure, then we would ask that you provide a legal opinion as to why that information cannot be provided here today. With that, I will hand the mic over to Mr. Généreux.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Merci au témoin, Madame Gideon.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, and thanks to the witnesses. I'm an artist, and you wanted to buy work from me in 1979. So the federal government paid me as an artist to buy my work. So you are responsible for the work that you have acquired. Today, 40 years later, you don't know where that work of art is, but it was loaned or stored, loaned to a government office. Have you ever been told by any government department, oh, you know, there's a work that's been stored or put on a wall, whatever? Have those people ever refused to collaborate with you to return a work? There's no time to answer this question, but you'll have another opportunity, Mr. Généreux. Now we have Mr. Assout for 5 minutes.
Associate, you've previously emphasized that economic reconciliation is about Indigenous communities determining their own priorities and strategies. When you testified in the Standing Committee on Indigenous and Northern Affairs, you stated, and I quote, "There are key components that drive our activities to work with Indigenous peoples to ensure that there's full participation in decision-making, that Indigenous peoples are able to enjoy their own means of subsistence and development, and that Indigenous peoples are able to determine their own priorities and strategies and to shape their own economic future." How is Indigenous self-determination reflected in decisions about storage, preservation, the accession, or the potential transfer of the collection?
Thank you very much for the question. So I think that is a very important point. So when the artworks are acquired, there's an Indigenous jury of expert artists who provide kind of advice on the artworks that would be acquired. Indigenous artists set their own price for the pieces of art that are acquired to make sure that it is a fair approach. When those works are acquired, there is now a kind of professional loan program. The Government of Canada doesn't charge any money for the loaning of these artworks, and that is to reduce the barrier to the loan of these artworks so that money will flow to the artists from the borrowing organization, whether that's a museum or a cultural institution. So I think there are also support from Indigenous elders as part of the program to help ensure that there are Indigenous elements at the heart of the program. Now, it is still administered by the Government of Canada, and I think it is important to consider whether in the future that can shift over time. And so that is something that we will be doing. As the Deputy Minister indicated earlier, we have to find the right balance between self-determination and stewardship of this very important collection. But I have confidence that can be done, and to make sure that the collection, that this important collection as it is now, is retained as a collection. There's I think one other small point to make is that there are a number of partnerships that are done, and in fact last year there was a partnership with Parliament with the Senate of Canada who acquired artwork through the program that we administer, and that is about helping to make sure that Indigenous art is in very important places across our country, and that it really does, the profile of Indigenous art is, I think, an important part of reconciliation and the partnership, but it also provides benefits directly to the artists as the profile is increased.
And once acquired, what mechanisms exist to ensure Indigenous communities continue to shape the priorities?
Yeah, I think we are looking at governance models now that would be able to bring in more Indigenous partnership and control as part of that. So I would say when pieces are loaned, the artist has to agree to that piece being loaned. So it not only does money flow to the artist, but there's a discussion and an agreement as part of the loan contracts that are developed with each loan. That is, there is not one framework loan contract, but the loan contracts are developed for each and every kind of loan that is put out. So the artists are as items are loaned, they're in control of whether they are loaned or not.
Colleagues, we have finished 4 rounds. We have time for maybe a half round if members are interested in posing another question. Conservatives, yep. Okay, so we'll do a half round, 5, and 2.5. Monsieur Généreux, vous avez la parole pour 5 minutes.
You have the floor for 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair, and thanks to the witnesses. I'd like to go back to my earlier example. I'm an artist, and Government of Canada buys one of my works and sends it over to a government department in some office in Canada. You have a contract with that department that rented the work. Have you ever had a refusal from any department because you found 12 works? 20 are reproductions, okay, but there's still 100 to be found. Have you had any refusals by departments? Or did any department say to you, yeah, we did have a work, but we have no idea where it went? Or a civil servant had that in his office, but he's gone and the work is no longer there. Has that happened? Good question. I'm not the one who had those direct conversations with people in those days, especially because we're talking about 10 years ago when the efforts to try to identify all the works of art began. So I can't tell you yes or no to that in answer to your question. But you said you got 12 works back. The 12 works that you were able to identify and recover, what was the time frame for those? From when to when? When we began to try to bring them back, was this after the audit? Well, we instituted a moratorium on the loan program in 2012 and completed it in 2017. So since 2017, we have been gathering all of the works of art which were in regional or national offices and some other departments. So of the 132 that were identified, 12 have come back. Well, for 12, we found the documentation and we know where they are. So they haven't come back to Ottawa. No. I mean, we were able to identify where they are. That doesn't mean they're not in Ottawa or they're in Ottawa. Well, this is very odd, this language being used. Here, this is a work in my hand. Now, once you've identified it and you had a rental contract for it in 2017, that's 8 years ago. It's not 45 years ago. Have you recovered that work? Is it in the vault here in Ottawa? Yes or no? Well, I'd have to check whether the 12 are in our vault, but we have them. Well, some of them are redundancies. So in those cases, they're in our vault, but there were 2 files. So there were 2 files for the same work. Okay, so there were copies. Well, okay, I'm coming back to my example. You had a rental or leasing contract. So to not be able to know today that there were 132 works that are absent, let's just use that term, missing, absent, call it what you will. There has to be somebody counting all of the work somewhere. In all of these works, somebody was counting something. And so we know 132 are missing. You found 12. And they're somewhere either in Ottawa or in the offices in which you found them, and then 20 are reproductions, and then there's still another 100. In those 100 missing, do you know where they are? And if you know where they are you in contact with those people to tell them, oh, do you have any refusals? Have people said, no, I can't return it to you because we no longer have it? Have you gotten any answers? These are simple questions that I'm asking. This is a work of art. You lent it to somebody in a department. You had a rental contract. You know where it is. You spoke to those people, and they say, "Okay, you've got it. You want to bring it back to Ottawa. Do you still have it? Yes or no? Have you received those answers?" Well, in the arts works that were part of the internal loans program from 90, there are 91 for which we are no longer able to document whether they're with us or whether this is a redundancy in the file. We're not able to document their location. So there are 9 for which you know where they are, because you talk about 91 out of 100. Well, 20 are reproductions. Of the original works are with us. You've just said 91. So where does that 91? Does that include the 12 you talked about? The 91, no. The 91 are part of the 132. I'm trying to do the math here. You got 12 back, or you're getting 12 back. You have 20 for which these are reproductions that you don't consider them to be important. You don't seem to attribute any importance to them. So there's 100 left. Of the 100, you said there are 91 about which you're not sure that you'll ever be able to recover them because you don't know where they are. And yet, if you talked about what Ms. Boyer said, thank you for your question. You've used up your time. I know it's difficult. Ms. Royer, you have the floor.
Merci, merci.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we'll just, okay. I used to own an art gallery, and it closed during COVID. It was in Port Moody, Coquitlam, my riding, and featured the work of professional and emerging West Coast artists. Artists locally, Indigenous artists, artists of different ethnicities. Many, many times I was asked, would I consider a rental program? And I researched it, actually, and looked into some of the community galleries in neighboring municipalities. And it's a lot of work. But the reason the artists were asking is because it's a revenue generator for them. And some of them are quite prolific, and they would much rather have their work on display than sitting in their studio on racks or in sheds or anything like that. So what I'm understanding is that decades ago, Indigenous artwork was purchased or created. There was an opportunity created for their work to be rented so that they would have revenue back from that. You mentioned that the work was placed in federal or regional offices, some hospitals, etc. Is it possible that any of the works went into MPs' offices at that time?
I honestly don't have the answer.
Yeah, okay, got it.
To that. I apologize. I don't have the answer.
Okay, and I mean, I'm really intrigued by the conversation, but I actually am quite disheartened by the fact that it's being politicized, because I think to get really to the heart of the issue, we would have to bring people in here from 40 years ago, because a lot of it will be reliant on memory because of the way in which our systems operated. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action number 67 and 69 remind us that preserving Indigenous cultural heritage is essential. And it calls on the federal government to modernize museum practices and ensure preservation and accessibility, which we are doing. And the audit confirmed that the department has accepted all 5 recommendations. Could you update our committee on the progress towards a life cycle funding plan, the question that I started to ask much earlier, and how that work reflects the TRC's emphasis on sustainable long-term stewardship of Indigenous heritage?
So we did complete the baseline costing analysis, and that costing analysis takes into account storage, it takes into account continued, it's not acquisition scenarios, but, sorry, I'm just going to take a quick look at my notes here. The monitoring, like all of the conditions that are required for us to be able to continue to meet our designations with respect to the collection itself and preserving the integrity of it. And I think that being able to update that baseline costing analysis every 5 years is absolutely fundamental. And it offers different options about storage, for example, right? Comparing the costs of whether or not the government of Canada continues to fund the storage versus looking at expert third-party storage. And, you know, it also talks about costing with respect to if the collection has to be moved. You know, what will be the cost of that? How many shipments of the truck you would need? 58, you know, like there is a lot. The human capacity relating to also being able to safely move and store the collection. So there's a lot of factors that the team have included in that baseline. It's not just straight, here's your salary cost, here's your O&M cost. Here are all the things that you need to build into your approach to make sure that we don't have a break in terms of support for the collection that could expose it to risks.
And if I may, obviously you weren't there all those years ago, and I know that if you were, you would have done things differently, and certainly if you had access to the technology that we have today. But what might you have done differently back decades ago?
Well, I think the internal loan program, when it was examined back in even prior to 2013, it was found that it wasn't sufficient to really maximize the economic benefits to the artists. And so, you know, loaning to offices is not the same as loaning to people that will do exhibitions and that will do galleries and that will, you know, have it as museums. So, like, I think that's important.
Monsieur Champoux, 2 minutes et demie.
Merci, je vais faire du...
Mr. Champoux, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you. I'll piggyback on what Ms. Voyer just said. I confess that I disagree with what was just said. You said that if you had been there at the time, you would have done things differently because the tools would have been different. That's not the case. At the time, tools existed equally for everyone. Museums were able to list the artists' work that they had. I don't see how it is that having tools are not, well, again, I am absolutely unable to understand this. I think we're in a lunatic asylum. If you have a signed contract, what was it, signed on a napkin that nobody could find? We know where the work of art used to be, but when you contact those people, they have no idea where the works are, or they didn't get contacted. Did they or not? We don't know. We don't know where the work stands in terms of identifying the lost works. And I have the impression that we don't even know whose works were lost and which works were lost. It's all very confused, and it's incomprehensible that it should be so jumbled. That's why it feels like a lunatic asylum. We've spent 2 hours discussing this, and I'm not convinced that anybody here around the table can say that they've gotten a satisfactory answer. I apologize, but I don't think we've had satisfactory answers to the questions that we have asked and that we have repeated, because I've heard MPs from all parties ask and repeat the same questions about the location of works. You know the last location of works? But what a detective would start with, what was the last known location, and then they'd say, great, okay, give me 5 minutes, I'll find the solution to the problem. But no, for years and years and years, it's been going on. My Conservative colleague asked you to provide documents because you didn't have the answer to the questions being asked. And this was a question about the progress in what work is being done. I think it's extremely important that to show transparency, you provide this committee the documents requested regarding the timeframes, where you stand currently in terms of meeting the recommendations provided in the audit in 2024, November. There still seems to be serious shortcomings. Where do you stand with respect to that? Next, what is your timeline? Where do you stand in the work of retracing the lost works, and what steps are you taking to get in touch with the artists involved. Perhaps some of them are no longer alive, but some of them perhaps are still alive and have no idea that their works have been lost. This is a lack of respect that I can't even conceive that any museum or art conservation person could have with respect to an artist of whose works they have guardianship. I hope you will answer the committee's request to provide the documentation requested. And this is an obligation that you have. This committee has the right to ask you for these documents. And if you don't provide them, as my colleague said earlier, at least you should provide us a legal opinion justifying your refusal. Thank you. I know that this was not a very easy 2 hours for you, but this situation, honestly, I came here full of good faith, goodwill, and open-mindedness. I was sure there were explanations as to what has happened. I have heard none, and I still see one big question mark. And between the word lost and unaccounted for, I think that this is the height of spin. So thank you. But I hope that we will be entitled to the documents that we've requested.
For participating in our committee today. As Mr. Champoux has reminded us, there were several documents that committee members have asked you to provide us, and the clerk can be in touch with you in the next coming days to help facilitate all of that. Again, we appreciate your time today and helping us get to the bottom of that issue. And with that, I will adjourn this meeting.